Hey everyone. You know how sometimes you just find yourself thinking about the really big questions? Like the stuff that's hard to wrap your head around? Well, today we're going full on philosopher mode
Yeah, philosopher mode activated.
and diving into this fascinating question. How do reason and religious commitment work together? I mean, can they even work together?
Right. And you found this great Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on it. Reason and religious belief.
Right. Reason and religious commitment.
Reason and religious commitment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they lay out like 6 big strategies that philosophers have tried to use to figure
Yeah.
this out.
6.
I know.
Okay, so we're going to try and break those down, right?
Uh,
Give everyone a good overview
Yeah,
without, getting lost in the weeds because it can get pretty dense pretty fast.
it can. And just to be super clear, up front, we're focusing on the philosophical attempts to bridge this gap.
Right, not endorsing any particular religious views ourselves, just trying to understand how philosophers have approached this.
Exactly.
Okay, so where do we even start with something like this?
Well, the entry starts with what it calls the way of argument. And basically, it's all about using logic, constructing arguments to try to support religious claims, like proving God exists, that kind of thing.
Okay, so like classic philosophical arguments for God.
Exactly.
But, I mean, how often do you think someone's actually convinced to be religious just by an argument?
Right. Probably not super often.
Right, but it seems like people keep trying.
They do. There's this drive to try to find that rational basis, for these big beliefs.
Oh, yeah, so? So what are some of the most common arguments they look at?
Well, a lot of them focus on the idea of God as this all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good creator, which, makes sense. It's central to a lot of religions.
Right, right.
But the entry points out some, limitations with the classical arguments.
Oh, okay. Like what?
Well, take the teleological argument, the watchmaker analogy, Paley's argument. Where like, the world's so complex it must have a designer.
Right.
So it maybe suggests a supernatural designer, but it doesn't tell you anything about the designer's values. Like, is it good? Does it care about us? That kind of thing.
Oh, I see.
And, plus that argument was big before Darwin.
Oh, right. Evolution throws a wrench in the whole designer thing.
Yeah, it definitely complicates things.
What other arguments did they talk about?
Well, there's the cosmological argument, like Leibniz's version, which focuses on the idea of a necessary being as the cause for the universe.
A necessary being. What does that even mean?
Basically, something that has to exist, that can't not exist.
Oh, okay.
So the argument is that the universe needs a cause, and that cause has to be this necessary being because it can't depend on anything else for its existence.
Okay, I'm kind of following.
But even if you buy all that, it doesn't necessarily mean that this necessary being is the god of, any particular religion. Hume pointed that out, right? Why does it have to have all the other qualities we associate with God?
Right, right.
Like, why does it have to be all loving or whatever?
So it's not as straightforward as it seems.
Not at all. And then you've got the ontological argument. Anselm's famous one?
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Something about defining God into existence.
Yeah, basically. He says that God is the greatest possible being, and the greatest possible being has to exist. Because if it didn't, it wouldn't be the greatest.
I mean, that sounds a little bit like a word game, doesn't it?
Right. And the entry brings up that problem. Like,
Right.
Does it actually prove anything? Or is it just assuming what it's trying to prove? Philosophers call that begging the question.
Begging the question.
And then there's the fact that you can make similar arguments about other things.
Right.
Like the greatest possible pizza.
Yeah.
Which kind of undermines the whole thing.
Right.
So yeah, the classical arguments, interesting, but not necessarily knockdown proofs.
But wait, the entry doesn't just stop there, right? What about more recent attempts? Are philosophers still trying to argue their way to God?
Oh yeah, they are. They haven't given up.
Okay, so what are they doing differently?
Well, one approach is basically trying to beef up the classical arguments by adding more specifically religious premises.
More religious premises. So they're kind of front-loading the argument with religious ideas.
Right. Like take the Kalam cosmological argument. It's gotten pretty popular.
The what now?
The Kalam cosmological argument, it's this Islamic philosophical tradition, but it's been, revived by contemporary philosophers like William Lane Craig.
Okay.
And basically, it starts with the idea that the universe had a beginning.
Okay.
And then it says everything that begins to exist needs a cause.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
But then it adds these premises that this cause has to be a personal being with free will.
A personal being.
Right. So it's trying to get you to a more traditional idea of God.
Okay, so they're trying to sneak God in through the back door.
Kind of, yeah. But the entry points out there's a trade-off.
Oh, what's that?
The more specific you get, the more questionable your premises might be. So you gain religious relevance, but maybe you lose some logical strength? If someone doesn't already accept your religious assumptions. The entry even mentions like Morriston, who's really critical of those added premises in the Kalam argument.
So it's like a balancing act, I guess.
It is, between religious meaning and logical rigor.
So what's the other modern approach to arguing for religion?
Well, there's the Bayesian approach, which has become really popular since like the mid-20th century. Thinkers like Richard Swinburne and Robin Collins have been big on this.
Bayesian? Like, what is that exactly?
Yeah. Basically, it's about probabilities.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to give a definite proof of God, they try to show that it's more likely that God exists, given all the evidence we have.
Evidence like what?
Well, they use things like the fine-tuning of the universe.
Yeah.
Or the existence of consciousness, stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
And they take the traditional arguments and reframe them in terms of probabilities.
So it's less about knocking down the opposition and more about stacking the deck in your favor.
Exactly. Each argument is like a little piece of evidence that nudges the probability higher. And then they often combine them into these big cumulative arguments where they take all these different lines of reasoning together to build a stronger case. And they even bring in things like religious experience into this framework.
So it's like building a case file rather than just having one smoking gun. I like that analogy.
Right. But, of course, the entry points out that there are still problems with using Bayesian reasoning for this.
Oh, of course. What kind of problems?
Well, the big one is assigning probabilities to these big, complex claims.
Yeah.
Like, how do you measure the probability of the universe existing if God exists versus if it doesn't?
Yeah, that seems impossible.
It is. And then there's the prior probability problem.
The prior probability. What's that?
It's basically how likely is something before you even consider the evidence. So, like, how likely is it that God exists before we even start looking at all these arguments?
Oh, I see.
And if you start with a really low prior probability for God's existence, then even really good arguments might not bump it up enough to make a difference.
Makes sense.
Right. And Swinburne, for example, he argues that God's existence is actually pretty likely to begin with, because the idea of God is so simple, one being that explains everything. But other philosophers, like Grunbaum and Sober, they push back on that hard. They say simplicity isn't a good guide to probability in these kinds of cases.
That's complicated stuff.
It is. And there are others, like Draper and Poston, who argue that even if God's existence is simple, that doesn't mean it's actually that likely.
Oh, boy. Okay, what about arguments for miracles? Do they talk about those?
They do.
Yeah.
But they point out that it's not as simple as miracle happened, therefore God.
Right, because, like, which God? There are a lot of religions out there claiming miracle.
Exactly. And the entry even says that if there's a transcendent reality, it doesn't have to be the God of, Christianity or Islam or whatever. It could be some other deity or even humans with special powers.
Right.
Plus, there are some, bigger problems with using miracles as evidence.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine. Like, what?
Well, Hume said that if you've got all these different religions claiming miracles, they basically cancel each other out. If every miracle is supposed to prove a different religion is true, then they can't all be right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's the whole problem of, like, why do some people get miracles and others don't? The entry talks about Overall's argument, about the injustice of it. Like, if there's a benevolent God, why doesn't everyone get healed?
That's a tough one.
It is.
And then there's just the whole question of what even counts as a miracle, right?
Exactly. The entry talks about how do you even define a miracle. Hume said it was a violation of the laws of nature. But that's tricky, because what if we just don't understand the laws well enough? Maybe there's a natural explanation we just haven't discovered yet.
Right, right.
And even if something really seems unexplainable, is a religious explanation automatically the best one? Or is it just a weird random thing? A brute fact, as some philosophers call it.
Oh, brute fact.
Yeah. So proving miracles is hard. And even if you do, it doesn't necessarily get you to a specific religious belief.
Okay, so it sounds like the way of argument, it's definitely a popular approach, but it runs into a lot of problems. And the entry even mentions some big counter-arguments, right? Like the problem of evil. And the idea that if God exists, why doesn't he make himself more obvious?
Yeah, those are big ones. It's tough to reconcile the idea of an all-powerful, all-good God with all the suffering in the world.
Yeah.
And why does God seem so hidden?
Right.
So yeah, trying to argue your way to a specific religious belief, it's a challenge.
But they do suggest a maybe more modest approach for the future.
Right, they do. They say that
Exactly.
maybe instead of trying to prove all the details of a specific religion, philosophers could focus on more basic claims,
Yeah.
like just showing that some kind of religiously ultimate reality exists, or that there's something transcendent out there.
So kind of like laying the groundwork.
Exactly. Maybe even using religious experience as part of the argument. And even if you can't prove all the specifics, just showing that something bigger is out there could still have a big impact on how people live their lives.
Right. It could lead to a kind of like searching or seeking.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the way of argument. What's next?
Well, the entry then moves on to what it calls the way of experience, which is a pretty different approach. Instead of logic and arguments, it focuses on personal religious experiences as a source of religious understanding and commitment.
So less about proving things and more about what people actually experience.
Exactly, like those moments where you feel a connection to something bigger than yourself,
Mhm.
that can be really powerful.
Right, right. And it says that this is how a lot of people actually come to their religious beliefs.
Yeah, it's often more about personal experience than intellectual arguments.
Makes sense. So how does that work philosophically?
Well, they talk about the idea of religious beliefs being basic.
Basic, like basic math.
Kind of, yeah. Like some beliefs we just accept without needing to prove them,
Yeah.
like our basic sensory experiences or simple mathematical truths.
Okay, I see.
So the argument is that religious beliefs that come directly from religious experiences can also be basic. They don't need to be based on some long chain of reasoning.
Interesting.
And Alvin Plantinga, he's a big name in philosophy of religion, he's argued that we shouldn't exclude religious beliefs just because they're based on experience.
So if we trust our senses to tell us about the world, why not trust religious experiences to tell us about the divine?
That's the analogy they often use.
Okay, so how does that analogy work?
Well, like we trust our senses to give us information about the world, right?
Right.
Even though there's a whole scientific explanation for how our senses work.
Right.
So in the same way, we could trust religious experiences, even if there are natural explanations for them.
I'm with you.
Like, just because we understand how the eye works doesn't mean we can't trust what we see. And philosophers like Alston and Wainwright, they've argued that religious experiences can justify religious beliefs, in the same way that sensory experiences justify beliefs about the physical world.
Okay, so it's about trusting the experience itself, even if we don't fully understand how it works.
Exactly.
But even with that analogy, aren't there still problems? Like, different religions have different experiences that lead to different beliefs, and those beliefs often contradict each other.
Right, that's a big one. Conflicting religious experiences.
Yeah, like how do you know which experience is right?
Well, the entry talks about a few responses to that. One is to say, well, we don't have a perfect way to judge between these different experiences and interpretations, so maybe we should focus on something else, instead of just belief.
Something else. Like what?
Well, some philosophers, like Alston and Audi, they talk about these non-doxastic attitudes, like acceptance, trust, or imaginative connection. Basically, you can still be affected by an experience, even if you don't fully believe the specific interpretation.
So, like, even if I'm not sure if I believe in God, I can still feel a sense of awe or wonder when I look at the stars.
Right, and that feeling can still be meaningful, even if you're not sure about the whole God thing.
Right, right. And that kind of leads into the pragmatic side of things.
Right, it
Yeah.
does. Like, Schellenberg talks about this. If living a certain way or practicing a certain religion has good effects on your life,
Mhm.
that could be a reason to keep doing it, even without being 100% sure about the beliefs.
So it's about what works
Yeah,
in a practical sense.
exactly.
That's interesting. But what if the conflicting experiences still bother me? Like, I want a rational basis, but it's hard when different people's experiences point to different truths.
Well, the entry mentions another strategy.
Yeah.
What if you focus on a more general content of religious experience? Something that could be true, even if some of the specific beliefs aren't.
A more general content.
Right, like the experience of a religiously ultimate reality, or just a sense of transcendence.
So something that everyone can kind of agree on, even if they disagree about the details.
Exactly, like Frank Davis talks about
Yeah.
this. You could have an experience that points towards something bigger without necessarily committing you to a specific religion.
That's a cool way to look at it.
It is.
Okay, but what about the whole neuroscience thing? Like, those studies that show that religious experiences could just be brain activity?
Right, the God spot in the brain and all that.
Yeah, if it's just chemicals and neurons firing, does that mean the experiences aren't real?
Well, the entry says that naturalistic explanations don't automatically rule out a transcendent source, like maybe God or whatever is working through those brain mechanisms.
Okay.
But it does raise the question, How do we know if an experience is really transcendent or just our brains messing with us?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is. And Alston, he comes back again here. He says, look, we have natural explanations for sensory experiences too, right?
Right.
But that doesn't make us doubt that the things we see and hear are real.
True.
So why should religious experiences be any different?
I see your point. But maybe there's a difference because we need our senses to function in the world, right?
That's the counter-argument.
We can't live without trusting our senses. But you can live without religion.
You can. And a lot of people do. And the entry says this is a debate that philosophers are still working on.
That's a good one.
It is. But even if you're not totally convinced by the way of experience, it can still have a big impact. Like we talked about those non-doxastic attitudes and the pragmatic benefits. You can still find meaning and value in religious practices, even if you're not totally sure about the beliefs.
Right, right. So it's not all or nothing.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the way of argument and the way of experience. What's the third way the entry looks at?
The third way is the way of testimony.
Testimony.
Yeah, basically it's about relying on what other people tell you about religious matters.
So like taking someone's word for it because they say they had a religious experience or something?
Right. Or because they're an authority in a religious tradition.
Okay, but how does that make it rational? Like, I'm just trusting someone else's word. How do I know they're right?
Yeah, that's the big question the entry brings up. Like, how can just hearing someone else talk about religion actually give me a good reason to believe it myself?
Right,
It's not like seeing something with your own eyes or experiencing something directly.
right, right.
It's secondhand information.
But, I mean, we rely on testimony all the time, right?
We do. Like, I believe all kinds of things based on what other people tell me.
Yeah, like the news, historical facts, science stuff, all of that.
Exactly.
We can't personally verify everything ourselves.
Right. So the entry makes this analogy.
Right.
If we trust testimony for all sorts of other things, why not for religious beliefs too?
Okay, but I feel like there's a difference.
Yeah, the entry acknowledges that. Religious claims are often about things that are, like, beyond our everyday experience. Supernatural stuff. It's not like someone telling me what they had for breakfast.
Right, it's a much bigger claim.
It is. And Greco talks about this. He says, well, is the testimony giving me a new reason to believe? Or is it just passing along information that was already justified somehow else?
Okay, so like, if someone tells me they saw God, I still need to decide if I believe them.
Right.
I need my own reasons.
Right. And if I believe them, it's because I trust them.
Yeah,
And that's a different issue.
I'm following.
But if it's just passing along information, then where did that information come from originally? Like, was it based on an argument or an experience? If so, then the way of testimony is kind of relying on those other ways. It's not really independent.
Right, it's like a chain of trust, I guess.
It is. But then the entry brings up this whole field of social epistemology, which looks at how social factors influence knowledge.
Okay, social epistemology.
Yeah, and basically the idea is that sometimes we have good reasons to trust what other people tell us, just because they're trustworthy.
Like if my doctor tells me something, I probably believe them.
Exactly.
Or a close friend.
Right. And philosophers like Goldman, Plantinga, and Williamson have written about this, about how trust plays a role in knowledge.
But even then, religious claims seem different, don't they?
They do, because they're often about things we can't easily verify. Like, I can't go and check if what they're saying about God is true.
Right, right. So it's still tricky. But the entry says there might be ways that testimony can still be useful for religious belief.
Yeah, like maybe it's more helpful for maintaining a belief you already have,
Yeah.
rather than forming a new one.
Okay, I see. Like, if I'm already religious, hearing other people talk about their faith can strengthen my own.
Right. Or maybe testimony is better at conveying the benefits of religious belief, rather than the truth of specific doctrines.
So, like, if someone tells me that their faith gives them peace and purpose, I might be more open to that, even if I'm not convinced about all the theological details.
Exactly.
Okay, but what if I'm someone who's trying to decide what to believe in the first place? Testimony doesn't seem very helpful then.
Right, because then you've got all these different voices, all saying different things, and you're trying to figure out who to trust.
Yeah, it'd be overwhelming. Like, who has the right answer?
Exactly, and the entry talks about how this can be a real dilemma.
But what about kids? Don't they usually just adopt their parents' religion? Isn't that mostly testimony?
Yeah, but the entry focuses on adults who are supposed to be, more capable of critical thinking.
Right, making their own choices.
And it also mentions the idea that some religious communities act as authorities. Like, they help their members maintain their beliefs through shared testimony.
So it's like a reinforcement system. Everyone's telling each other the same things.
Right. And Zygzemski has written about this, but then the entry also warns about the potential dangers of that.
Dangers.
Yeah, like what if a community is based on false or harmful beliefs?
Oh, right.
Then this kind of reliance on authority could actually be bad. It could keep people stuck in harmful belief systems.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And philosophers like Fricker and Lackey have talked about this, about the ethical problems with blindly trusting authority.
So it seems like testimony has a place, but it's not a foolproof way to justify religious belief.
Exactly. It plays a big role in how religions are passed on. But on its own, it's not the strongest philosophical foundation. Maybe it works best in combination with other approaches.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the next way?
The next one is the ineffabilist way, which is kind of a mouthful.
The ineffabilist way. What's that all about?
Well, ineffable means something that can't be described in words. So this approach is all about the idea that the divine is ultimately mysterious and beyond our understanding.
Oh, okay. So it's like God is so big we can't even talk about it.
Exactly. And you find this idea in a lot of different religious traditions, like mystical experiences where people feel a connection to something vast and incomprehensible. And the thinking is, if the divine is truly transcendent, then maybe we can't really grasp it with our limited human minds.
I mean, I guess I can see that. Like, there are some things that are hard to put into words.
Right, like try to describe the feeling of love or the beauty of a sunset. You can try, but you can't fully capture it.
Right. So how does that help with the whole reason and religion thing?
Well, the idea is that if the divine is beyond language and thought, then maybe religious commitment can't be judged by rational standards. It's not about having a set of beliefs that you can prove or disprove. It's about a different kind of knowing.
A knowing that's beyond words.
Exactly.
But the entry points out a problem with this whole idea.
Oh, yeah. The big one. It's called the paradox of ineffability.
Paradox of ineffability. That sounds complicated.
It is. Basically, if you say that the divine is ineffable, that you can't describe it, aren't you already describing it?
Oh, right. By saying you can't talk about it, you're kind of talking about it.
Exactly. It's a self-contradiction. Alston, he really laid this problem out clearly.
So is the whole ineffabilist thing just a dead end?
Well, not necessarily. The entry talks about different kinds of ineffability. Like, maybe it's not that we can't say anything about the divine.
Okay.
Maybe it's more that we can't fully grasp it.
Right.
Or that our language is always going to be inadequate.
So, like, we can talk about God, but we can never really capture the full reality of what God is.
Right. And even those who emphasize the ineffable often still use language to talk about the divine. They just acknowledge that it's always going to be limited and metaphorical.
So, like, those descriptions of God as light or love or a boundless ocean.
Exactly. They're trying to point to something, but they know they can't fully capture it.
Right.
And the entry actually gives some examples of this from different traditions.
Like what?
Well, there's Nicholas of Cusa. He was a philosopher back in the 1400s.
Yeah.
And he talked about how God is beyond all our categories.
Wow. So this idea has been around for a while.
Oh, yeah. And then there's the Tao Te Ching, that ancient Chinese text. Talks about the Tao, the ultimate reality, as something that can't be named or defined.
So maybe the key is to focus on those more limited forms of ineffability,
Yeah.
where you're acknowledging that our understanding is always going to be incomplete.
Exactly. And the entry lists out, like, 5 different ways of thinking about limited ineffability.
5 ways.
I know, it's a lot. But the ones that seem most relevant to this whole reason and religion thing are the last 2. One is just that our understanding of the divine is always going to be incomplete. And the other is that the divine is infinitely greater than anything we can imagine.
So any argument we could make against it is probably going to be based on our limited human perspective.
Exactly. Which means it might not actually apply to the divine. It's like trying to judge a symphony by listening to one note.
Right, you're not getting the whole picture.
Exactly. And this is where ineffability can actually kind of protect religious commitment.
Protect it.
Yeah, like it can shield it from rational criticisms. Because it's basically saying, look, we don't fully understand this, so you can't really argue against it.
That's interesting. But then what does religious commitment even look like in this view, if you can't really define what you believe in?
Well, the entry says that in this view, the commitment is shaped by that very awareness of our ignorance. It's about recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and maybe we never will.
So it's a kind of humble faith.
Exactly. And instead of focusing on doctrines and dogmas, the emphasis shifts to things like meditation, contemplation, and seeking a direct experience of the divine.
So it's more experiential, more about feeling and intuition than logic and reason.
Right, and some people might still use the traditional language and rituals of their religion, but they might see them more as symbols or metaphors that help them connect to this ineffable reality.
Okay, I can see how that could be appealing.
It can be, but the entry points out that it might not be for everyone.
Right, some people really want those clear-cut answers.
They do.
And what about, like, those strong arguments for naturalism, the idea that everything can be explained by natural laws?
Right. That would still be a challenge for this view, just like it is for any view that involves something transcendent. But the entry also says that the current dominance of naturalism isn't necessarily because it has all the answers.
So it's still an open question.
It is.
Okay, so the ineffabilist way, it's definitely a different way of looking at things. More mystical, maybe? But it does offer a possible way to reconcile reason and religion by acknowledging the limits of reason itself.
Exact.
Okay, so what's the fifth way?
The fifth way is the pluralist way. And this one really dives headfirst into the whole issue of religious diversity.
Oh, yeah, the fact that there's so many different religions out there with different beliefs.
Right. And the pluralist way is about trying to make sense of that diversity
Hmm.
and maybe even see it as a strength.
Okay, that's interesting. Because usually people see religious differences as a problem.